Come on up, guys. Hello, hello. Thank you guys so much for coming. Enjoy yourselves. Have a good time. Have some beer, have some bows. All right. So those two are the two episodes that are airing tomorrow. You guys are actually, especially the most recent one, the episode number 4, you guys are among the first people in America to see that. And the rest of America will see it tomorrow. But thank you guys so much for coming out on a really crappy New York night to join us for both the screenings and also a really fantastic conversation with some of the more interesting people that I know and that in some cases have been frequent WNYC guests and collaborators. I'm actually just going to introduce them really quickly, and then I think they will more than introduce themselves in the course of our conversation. What we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about the show, some of the issues behind it, but then we're actually going to open things up for you guys to comment and ask questions yourselves. There is, in fact, a microphone here. After a little conversation, 20 minutes or so, we invite you guys to come up here and ask any questions, give any feedback, share any thoughts you might have yourselves. Everything tonight is actually, from this point on, being live streamed. So hello, Internet America. And will be available for you guys to watch later as well. But let's begin with our introduction of our panel. On the far right, we have Amy Chua, the author of Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, generator of many memes, mom memes. We have Jay Smooth, who is a longtime, not just, sort of pundit of the multicultural condition, and the founder of one of the best shows on WBAI and a regular video blogger, as it were, on a wide range of topics, most of which are directly relevant to issues of this show. But he's also been working with Fusion most recently to create video content for them. And then to my immediate right, we have Nora Lum, better known as Awkwafina. For those of you guys who know, she is a rapper. She is hilarious. You can see her on MTV's Girl Code, and hopefully a lot more stuff very, very soon. And I myself, I'm Jeff Yang, and I am Hudson Yang's dad. That's like actually my permanent lower third now. It's funny because I do other stuff too. I write for the Wall Street Journal. I've had a history of, kind of covering the Asian American landscape in various ways. But now, literally, when I'm on TV, you just look down there, the whole banner just says father of actor, which I'm totally cool with. Because this is such a unique and interesting moment for us, for all of us who are here, for all of you who are out there, and for not just Asian America, but I think America at large. And I want to begin, actually, by just kicking it out to our panel to give some thoughts. I mean, I think you guys now at this point have probably seen 4 episodes, at least 4 episodes. What are your thoughts? What's your sort of hot take in some ways about what Fresh Off the Boat means, what you took out of it yourselves, and what you think, honestly, is going on phenomenologically, if you will, with television, that this is happening at this moment? And let's start with Amy.
Well, I love it. I find it hilarious. I told Jeff I was, like a lot of Asian Americans, I was terrified when I sat down to watch the first episode on Hulu. I just thought, please make me like this. And I did. Yeah. And what was interesting is, obviously, I, unsurprisingly, completely relate to the mom character. Especially, I love the second episode with the report cards. And but I think more interestingly, and you have to realize, Eddie Huang hates me, right? I mean, I think a friend of mine told me that I'm on his menu. There's like a, burn the Tiger Mom in effigy bow. But I love all the characters. I love the show. That is, it's not just the mom that resonates for me. There are times when, lots of times when I'm like, oh my God, that's Eddie Yang. I mean, like the whole I actually had the thermos with that, and just wanted to fit in. And then sometimes I relate to the middle kid, or like the dad. So one thing I was saying is, it's interesting. that every character in that family is actually extremely different from each other. And I think that's very stereotype busting, right? Because the father doesn't have the same relationship to race or America, or he's like, I see a lot of I remember, he resonates for me too. He's the optimist. He sees the American dream, very pragmatic. The mom's points of just feeling like, who are these people? I don't fit. I still feel that way sometimes at Yale Law School. Sometimes I'll walk in my own faculty, I'm like, something here doesn't fit in, and it seems to be, me. So anyway,
Yale Law
that's
School.
yeah. So anyway, to me, it really resonated. And what I was saying to Jeff earlier is that it's not just that it shows that the Asian American community is non-monolithic, right? But that even within individual Asian Americans are non-monolithic. There are parts where I feel like the mom, parts where I feel like the dad, parts feel like, the kid. So that's my short take.
Yeah, I mean, that the novelty of just having more than one Asian American on screen at any given time is is inherently revolutionary on some level. Jay, what about you? What's your take on it?
I mean, at the risk of boring everyone with unanimity, I'm loving it for the most part so far as well. I mean, just as a hip hopper, the whole experience of having hip hop give you a sense of belonging and something to cling to as an outsider resonates with me, and I'd love to see that part get fleshed out more. But just the ways that hip hop is referred to, other than the part in the third episode with the ODB, but we can get into that later.
We'll get into that.
Get into that later. But for the most part, it's low-key subversive to have the references to Nas and Mobb Deep, like not the sort of watered-down hip-hop references you'd usually get for the mainstream.
Yeah.
And then, just as you were saying, I find it remarkable just to see so many Asians on screen. There's so much time spent with only Asian people on screen. Whatever's the Asian version of the Bechdel test, the show is just killing it. And just so many different temperaments and perspectives. I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing. So I'm enjoying it so far.
Thank you so much, Jay. Awkwafina.
I love the show. And, I think part of that is driven by the fact that I like seeing Asian people on TV. And, I think it's caked with what I like to think of as good stereotypes, as in stereotypes that Asians perpetuated and are funny because they're true, but in a way that it's like, we made these up, like putting Pert Plus into a half-used bottle. Like that's being Asian right there, and it's something that I feel like, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, like, literally Pert Plus, just anything that has to do with Pert Plus. And,
we all didn't know that about us, but.
Yeah, exactly. It's the subtleties there. And I think it's all about the subtleties, and more like an Asian American comedy. It's also very hip. And it speaks to my generation, the millennials, and it speaks to the generation, I guess, that came before that. So it's a very new and accurate show. So I like it.
I mean, when you look out on the vast waves of the social sphere, Twitter, et cetera, you do have just this amazing number of Asian Americans saying, "Oh, this is so relatable." That's actually the term, relatable, right? And I don't think it's so much that it is literally relatable, as in, that's my son up there, but that's not my son. That's not really what my son's like at home, except for the mouthiness and talkbackiness. That's kind of him. But that wasn't me growing up. And yet, there are little kind of there are moments throughout, right, where you have that sort of flash of recognition. And that thing you said about the Bechdel test, right? I don't know. Maybe it's like two Asians on screen at the same time, period, right? But two Asians on screen at the same time who aren't, like cooking food, let's say, or delivering it to other people to eat. Right. It's like there's just such a low bar on some level for us to just be on screen.
Right, and just dealing with the mundane aspects of life.
And that mundanity, although it's obviously also hyper real, there's kind of crazy stuff. The second episode especially is very crazy. But on that note, you mentioned on the reel, right? Like the role of hip hop in this, and on some level, I feel one of the things that's so remarkable about this is it's telling the story of this family not through the lens of quote unquote fresh off the boat Asian Americans, right? Which is what people thought it was going to be, so like recent immigrants, et cetera. But Asian Americans have actually been here for a while. The parents too, right? Mm-hmm. And then through this kid who's grown up in a world where he has this spectrum. Do I want to be more like the white kids who hate me and, you know, treat me like dirt, or something else? And that something else ends up being, there's this thing called hip hop, and it blows my mind. I mean, you both you guys grew up kind of in you know, maybe slightly different eras, but in the same world, right? Tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are on hip hop's role here and in your own lives, really. What does it mean to like embrace hip hop as a facet of your cultural identity, I guess, growing up at that age?
I mean, hip hop was definitely pivotal for me, just in terms of me being a very introverted, socially isolated kid, and then being a kid who grew up in Harlem but became a scholarship kid at one of the elite high schools, Fieldston, up in Riverdale. Just having something that I could claim as my own, this thing I belonged to, and a sense of, you know, it's something I continued up until working in the corporate world in my 20s. I would be at the ad agency building websites, and I would have my headphones on listening to the Chronic 2001 album, something that I knew would be utterly repellent to all of my colleagues in the workplace, but it was something that grounded me in, I'm a part of this community, and I'm validated as a person by that, so it's okay if I don't fit in here. My sense of self doesn't hinge on that because I have this grounding of belonging to this community in hip-hop. So it was sort of, that's something I'd love to see fleshed out more, because he's still kind of the lone hip-hopper on the show so far, and it kind of portrays a superficial relationship with hip-hop as the norm for anyone else if they're into it. So I'd love to see that sort of kinship and the sort of depth of support that you get from a relationship with hip-hop.
Yeah, I think what people forget about hip hop is that it's subversive music, and if you ever felt like an outsider or a rebel, hip hop speaks to you from a very young age. And I'm actually glad that the episode that it touched on like Nirvana, because I feel like that like grunge and punk was kind of another way. That's subversive music as well. And you know, hip hop really speaks to New York City kids growing up. You know, it's not appropriation in the fact that, you know, we grow up on this. This is our music, and we don't have Asian subversive music in America. So, you know, this is the genre that we cling to, and it's liberating to listen to as a young kid.
We were talking in the green room how like Beijing opera is actually like our thug music.
Yeah, like on the bus with headphones, like my
Doing, doing,
my
doing.
life, listening to Peking opera. Yeah.
And that's always gone both ways. I mean, there's been that fascination, obviously, with Hong Kong cinema in black culture, and I mean, in black culture dating back to the 70s when we would go see it in Times Square.
Oh, totally.
And I used to go to the 43rd Chamber.
Oh,
in the 90s, and you know, and RZA would be up in there. And I was telling the story backstage of how I interviewed Michelle Yeoh and asked her if she was aware of Hong Kong cinema's huge influence on hip-hop, and she told the story of how in the mid-90s she got a phone call from Donnie Yen saying, hey, you know, there's this gang named the Wu-Tong Gang that's in Hong Kong right now trying to meet John Woo, and they thought it was some sort of triad trying
Get
to make
the brothers out.
and that was their introduction to this deep fascination and sort of way that Asian culture resonates among hip-hoppers. And of course, there's an influence in b-boying and breaking.
You know, and actually that's something which, I mean, I've written about martial arts for a couple, you know, like a generation now, but that connection point of marginalized cultures kind of finding other ways to speak out and other ways to fight back. You know, in Asia, it was the development of things like the martial arts. You couldn't have weapons, right? So you turned yourself into a weapon. And similarly, you know, here in America, in New York, in the Bronx, you didn't have a voice, so you created a voice. You found your own medium. I mean, it's interesting because Asian Americans for now 20 years have not had any way of getting into the media, and they've mostly kind of created their own media. I mean, as somebody who's, you know, spent a lot of time on YouTube, and you as you know, somebody who's basically invented like an independent space for yourself also, it's like a totally different world now. There's all these people who are carving out niches using the tools that they you know, have on their home computers. Right. But okay, so to that point, I mean, you know, why is it important to have this primetime TV show then if YouTubers, you know, out there are getting like tens of millions of people following them, subscribing to their stuff and watching them and everything? I mean, what's this moment all about?
I think the difference is that the way that people found Awkwafina, they had to do that on their own. No, it wasn't being fed to them. And I was saying, like, just the other day, I played in to a white audience, 100% white people, and there was a comedian that went on before me, and he was white, and he said, "How can you tell an Asian vagina? It's squinty." So about 3 white girls in the audience, they got up and was like, "That's not funny," And like, I wrote an article for Jezebel about Fresh Off the Boat and the importance of it. And I think the importance of it is that, if a young white kid sees Asian people on television, on primetime, on ABC, they might be desensitized to it to a point where they're not going to call someone a ching chong, the only Chinese kid in their class. It's important to be in the mainstream no matter what. Visibility is 100% the most important thing for Asian Americans, for all minorities right now.
And I think it's easy to underestimate those of us who live in a sort of, I'm too old to be millennial, but a millennial media consuming bubble. Right. It's easy to have the impression that all of us are absorbing the same sort of fringe avant-garde material, but the reality is everyone who's ever heard of a show like The Wire is a tiny fraction of who will watch this week's Big Bang Theory.
Exactly.
So as far as America's larger culture, the impact of having a network show is still a huge thing as far as informing and letting people know what lives are like.
It was just announced today, actually, that including the streaming and DVR, that Fresh Off the Boat bumped up from a 2.5, and there's all kind of esoteric Hollywood stuff or whatever, but it matters because this is what people buy and sell, right? So it went from 2.5 to 3.1. 10 million people saw last week's episodes on Wednesday, the first and the second one. And that's more than have seen anything Asian American in 20 years. And what they saw was kind of novel, right? And I want to go back to Amy to the interplay between the parents and also between the parents and the kids. I think it's really interesting because this is what has been called out repeatedly by Asian American audiences, that they love the show by and large. There are obviously always issues. It's not a perfect show, but the things they find most inauthentic are that, number one, the parents always have this public display of affection. And my parents have been married for, old enough to have me and my sister, and I don't think I've ever seen them get closer than 3 inches to each other. So I don't know how they did it. It's like, but that public display of affection is super rare. And then the support that the parents have for the kids, right? I mean, in the first episode, Eddie is being suspended. You think he's going to be killed, right? But instead, his parents actually stand up for him. So, Amy, I mean, is this a subversive view of Asian American parenting, or is this something?
No, it's funny. First of all, it is such a historic thing that at Yale Law School, where I teach, I had no idea about this, but the Asian American, there was a big screening of, the premiere, sponsored by Apalsa, and a huge turnout, and then a similar talkback like this. No professors. It was just all students. And so I was talking to some, and by the way, I think that's generational. I think people in their 50s and 60s, it never occurred to them that there would be, I don't know, I think there's something young about that. But that second episode, that really resonated for me. So this is the episode, I don't know if you all saw it, but it's the more of the report card, more focused on, the mom has, he gets straight A's, and the mom basically thinks that means that the school is too easy. And, she creates this Chinese learning center at home, and all of that happened to me, literally. And that's that generation, right? I don't know if it would happen today, but that was roughly whatever in the 60s, 70s, and I had Chinese school at home. My mom had that same reaction. But this is the part that I loved, and I think this is very authentic. Maybe I agree with the public display of emotion thing. Okay, that doesn't. But the support does, and I think that's what I think that's the subtlety that I love about the way Constance Wu portrays this. It may be hard for people not in the culture to get, but it is completely consistent for a parent to be seen, as a child. You feel, why is my mom so irrational and demanding and strict and whatever, which I felt with my own mom so many times. And then just on a dime, where something really matters, you realize that she would take a bullet for you, that she always has your back. That, so even though in my generation, my mom would not have maybe, I'm going to sue you kind of thing, my parents were exactly the same way, which is they were like, you just feel like, and it's kind of a huge relief. It's like they have your back, So that combination actually, Jeff, particularly spoke to me. It didn't seem unreal to me. And by the way, there are lots of failed Asian families where I think that second component doesn't come in, right? I think those are the people for whom tiger parenting fails, where it's all about the grades and you don't feel unconditional love. But what I loved about this is that I think that captures a real slice of, that's certainly the way that I experienced it. So for me, that worked very well.
How about you, Aqua? I mean, having grown up also in an Asian American family with an Asian American mom, I don't know how similar your background was or different it was. And your parents, were they immigrants or were they?
Well, my dad actually is. I hate to use this term, but he's an Asian Guido. He's a gym tan laundry. He'll call me and be like, "Hey, no, what are you doing later?" So he was, being raised by him. He is what he is. He listens to like Jackson Brown. He listens to Rush in the car. He will roll up in the car like blasting Bonnie Raitt. So like, he's not typical. And and then my mom passed when I was very young, and she was Korean. So I was mostly raised by my Chinese grandma. And let me tell you, she was watching OJ every day, every day. And she told me, she was like, when you go to school, don't tell the black kids that you think OJ's guilty. And I was like, all right, I won't. Go every night we'd watch OJ, America's Most Wanted, Cops. She was like on it. So that, that's why I really love the grandma on it, because my grandma would tell me about the first time like she saw a beheading when I was 5 years old. She was like, I have seen a human head severed from the body. And I was just like, thank you. So in that way, yeah, I mean, I grew up from a very non-traditional family, but, in the way that is, trying to portray a traditional family, it also is very dysfunctional. And I think the dysfunctional aspect of it is what I relate to the most.
I mean, functional, dysfunctional. It's like you can hold two things in your head at once, right? And I think that's one of the things about Asian American families. I think even, Eddie especially is very, very overt about this. Yeah. Look, he grew up with abusive and neglectful parents in a crazy setting. Cops were called, he beat kids up, was suspended, all this stuff happened, and yet he and his parents are close, and he and his brothers are close, and there's something that's always persisted throughout that, right? But let's talk a little bit beyond the family too, because I think that, one of the things that people have called out repeatedly in this show, both Asians, non-Asians, white people, is the use of the term white people. And the show's interesting relationship with whiteness on some level. And I know that it's complicated because the goal isn't, Eddie would say this straight up, it's not to turn around and just mock white people, but it is to actually, on some level, interrogate from a different perspective what's normative, right? What's the center of the world? And this is obviously something, Jay, which I'm sure you have, something to talk about here, because it is on some level the enterprise, right? We want to get to a point where the default isn't always going to be looking a certain way and being a certain way.
Right. First of all, it's always fascinating to me how the mere mention of race is construed as being racist. So
totally.
Saying the phrase "white people" makes you the real racist. And I think there's always been a tendency to measure our progress in race relations by whether we've reached the point where we can never acknowledge that race exists ever again. But yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. I think a lot of even consciously egalitarian-minded white people take for granted that whiteness is normative, white makes you the center of the universe, and progress comes in the form of we white people remain in the center and you get to come over here and be here in the center with us, where actual progress is there is no objective center, which I think is discomforting for a lot of people. I think it's important for a show like this to demonstrate like this is this Asian perspective and you're in the periphery. You're Kramer on this show. You're not Seinfeld.
Yeah. They're all Kramer in the show. And, And I mean, Amy,
Yeah.
a lot of similar stuff came up because of your specific, kind of how it was played out as like Chinese parenting versus white parenting, whatever. That language, whether or not that was specifically how you wanted to frame it, it did become this culture war, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. On this whiteness, I was thinking, I was reading Eddie Wong's, piece, and how he, in some ways felt that maybe it was kind of watered down or this, but I think this is, I think when you watch these different episodes, maybe more the first two, there are these uncomfortable moments, right? There are, like when they use white or whatever, and it's not, so they're, I mean, it's flipped too, like when they said, let's put a white face in front of the restaurant, right? Because that's super uncomfortable, but it's also real. Like in the triple package rate, in Indian hotels, Indian-owned hotels, they've found that you put a white person in the front and it just does much better, right? That's a sociological fact. So it's, and it's also real that in my household, my parents talked about white people like that, so, but it is uncomfortable. I mean, I think that's how I started. I think that's partly what makes it not just, I mean, it has to be an ABC sitcom, right? I mean, but it is edgy, I think. I mean, I think that's the part. Like, I don't think it's malicious or whatever, but it is in some ways turning the tables a little bit. I mean, I've heard people say, well, I was glad to see Honey, because she was a warm, a friend. First couple episodes, there's not really one impressive, really smart, subtle white person, right? There's the ones that don't pay the bill, the ones that are bullies. It's kind of like, so is this in some ways, and I just think it's so interesting, right? Is this some ways stereotypes that Asians have of whatever, but then it's also the reality about, like, you put the white face out. So I think that's partly what makes it so interesting, right? It is a little uncomfortable. There are moments like that.
I think, Jay, in using the term the Kramering of white America, the reality is none of the characters in even the first two episodes would be looked at twice if they were on any show that had a primarily white cast. They would just be the kooky neighbor, the crazy coworker, whatever. The difference is that in the center now is an Asian American family, and all of a sudden the othering is reversed, right? And I'm glad, actually, on some level, that the first two episodes did that. I mean, I'll say, over the course of 13 episodes, there are episodes that are straight up sitcom, kind of like just trying to have fun and be funny type episodes, which so many people on Twitter are asking for, why does it have to be about race? Let's just have fun and be funny. And then there are episodes that are really kind of uncomfortable to watch, unless you're laughing, right? But so one of the things that actually, I mean, and I'll say it up myself, made me uncomfortable about the first episode here, of course, is, kind of the coinage of the realm that they used for Eddie, that he's dispossessed because of his race, his identity, and he feels like the only way we can do it is essentially by, embracing this kind of casual misogyny, right? And I had a lot of talks with Hudson on this too. He had huge problems with this because he's 11 years old. You know what I mean? At 11 years old, at like 15 years old, I was still like, girls. No, so. Yeah. But he was going through that whole thing, and obviously, people can talk a lot about hip hop and the component of hip hop which does use misogynistic terms or represent images of women which are more than uncomfortable, are very problematic. But when depicted this way, there are issues with it, and I just want to throw it out. Like, I think it's humanized in part because obviously the person in control of the conversation is ultimately Honey, right? But there are still issues there, and I'm kind of curious what your guys' thoughts are. I know it's one of the things that Eddie certainly called out, because that's not hip hop, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly misogyny has been an aspect of hip hop over the years, but I felt some kind of way about how it was, which is how hip hoppers express misgivings about things. I felt some kind of way about how it was portrayed here. First of all, because it rings false to me that is the lesson you'd take from listening to ODB. Oh, yeah. I mean, he was never about being blinged out and validating himself by objectifying a woman on his arm. I mean, ODB's message was, I'm going to embrace being a grimy weirdo, and you can either take that or leave it.
Right.
So it seems strange to me that he would listen to ODB and have this epiphany that I want to be blinged out and make it rain. And I just, in general, as someone who is often an insider representing hip-hop in an outsider space, I always feel like it's important for me to ground any criticism in the context of hip-hop is this hugely replenishing, deep, rich, beautiful thing that has been the bedrock of my identity in so many positive ways, and it also has certain tendencies that are problematic. And the way that it played out in this episode, just stepping back on basic sitcom level, it was funny, it was effective, but I feel like I haven't seen enough balance of why hip-hop is so positive and important from him to sort of balance out the way it was portrayed there.
Definitely, and I think that what you mentioned about the kind of the tribal identity, right? The connection to other people who love this. There's some more of that coming. You know, it is 13 episodes, but I think that's still something that needs to more deeply be explored because he's represented as this. You know, he is the only one, right? That fish out of water thing. They hit it really hard this season, and I hope that does change. But I mean, on that note, you know, so. What was your feeling about it? Like when you're seeing, you know, that episode and just kind of the trope, I guess.
Well, I think that like Asian America, like hip hop is something that is often seen in sitcoms as being something that's like, you know, has its stereotypes. And one of them is like video vixens, bling. And I think that is a multi-layered identity that Eddie Huang in real life has. And not necessarily to the extent that he wants to, you know, put, you know, whatever with women or whatever. I think that there's a boundary in like TV shows that you can't explore what Jay was saying is like the positive aspects of how hip hop influences you because it's so controversial. And I would like to see that played out in television shows, but for a comedy that has enough baggage already, I don't think they're going to have time to really explore that identity. But, you know, it's important. That's why it's important to read Fresh Off the Boat and watch the show. Because hip-hop has played such an immense role in Eddie Huang's life. It will never be able to be construed on cable television, ever. So...
I mean, you know, let's be honest here. If you actually took even a tenth of what happens in the book itself and put it on TV... Put it on at midnight. I don't care when you put it on. It's still not gonna work. And if you make my son be that guy, I'm like.
And can I just say, to give credit where it's due, that Danny Brown theme song has got to be the hardest hip hop TV show theme song. I mean, we all loved the Fresh Prince song because the show had sentimental value, but that song wasn't hot. This is actually great hip hop in prime time.
It is. It's like if nothing, I would like say much more than nothing, but if nothing else, you know, the subversion is in some ways the representation. You could say that about Asian Americans. You could say that about hip hop. You could say that about, you know, a lot of the things that are on this show. The very fact that it's happening is subversive. It could and should go farther. I would be not the first to say that. Eddie's always the first to say that, but I'll be like the second or third because I think that over time, you know, if this thing gets its chance, it will be able to grow. I hope it will, just as the characters will grow. But you know, again, we got to get there first. This is episode 4, and I think that you know what I'm going to say now is there is a microphone over here, and if you guys you have questions, feedback for anybody here, or just want to share, we would like questions though, as opposed to
yelling at us.
You know, diatribes. But come on up and go to the mic, and we'll integrate you in. We have a question already. Let's go for that because in between we'll keep on talking. But yeah, can you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, I'm Maxine Builder, and so the show, as an Asian American woman, the show is really exciting to me, but I'm also a Korean American woman. And so I do feel some frustration in that this is a Chinese American family. And so there are points when I'm watching the show and I just feel I'm like right there and it feels so close, but I'm not 100% there. And that's been really frustrating to me. And it's also then frustrating to see a Korean American actor, Randall Park, play the part of a Chinese American dad. And the thing that I've been struggling with is, does that even matter at this point? Like, are we not even at a point where that is a concern? Should I just suck it up and deal with it? Or like, is that something that we should be talking about?
Oh, it's definitely. I just to jump in, but then I think you guys should share too, because I think that's really an important point. The last thing you said specifically, we should never shut up. if there's one thing we should take out of this, it is that we do need to share, we do need to talk, and this should be the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it, right? And I think that, you know, that's one thing which, if you recall, Eddie wrote a like 5 million word piece for Vulture, which many people read like 4,900,000 words of, and they got to this point feeling like he hated the show, was totally disappointed, wanted it to die, and then they didn't read the last part, which is, but you know what? I've been thinking of this as the auteur, as the author, as the guy who controlled everything, as the, you know, the chef de cuisine, not the sous chef, right? And certainly not the consumer. But once I sat down and saw this on TV, it made me realize this is not the end of the product. This is the beginning, and it's the conversation that follows, especially among all of you guys and all of us and anybody else out there in Twitter land, right? That really matters. So the very fact that this is just the first story in 20 years should really be telling people this is not the last story in 20 years. And if this, look, I've been close enough to the room, you know, now, the rooms in which these things happen. We're talking about this. I literally, at the wrap party, a very high-placed senior executive at somewhere came up to me and said, you know why we're rooting so much for the show to succeed? Because if it succeeds, we have so many things in the pipeline, Asian American things that we could do. I'm like, why do you have to wait for this show to succeed for that to happen? But that is what they say, and that's how they think. And if this show doesn't do well, I don't know. It's like the groundhog seeing his shadow. What happens, right?
Yeah. That's such a great question, and so this is just from a personal take. Because of my own experiences with Tiger Mom, have a very generous attitude towards the show, right? Because there are lots of it that I am not a hip hop person, was not, you know, and part of this is because when that Tiger Mom book came out, you know, I just wrote it in 3 months. I still remember my daughter, before it came out, she says, you know, Mommy, nobody is going to read this book because, you know, you're not a famous person and nobody's going to care about your memoir, right? So there's this huge firestorm. And one of the questions I would get as things in the middle of the firestorm is, well, how do you feel? There are very few prominent Asian Americans, and how do you feel, you know, speaking for anything you say is, you know, there are few voices out there, so do you feel, and I think that is too big a burden, right? Like the answer is what Jeff said. You need more and more and more. But if you put the burden on the one, I mean, it has a very silencing effect. There's no way anybody, one show, one book, one memoir, one song can speak for everybody, you know. So I sort of feel, and I totally know where you're coming from, but it's just another way of agreeing with you, Jeff, that this should be the beginning, right? Because there's just no way that it can stand for, even, believe it or not, among Chinese Americans. You should see how many differences of views among the Chinese Americans, and even among the Taiwanese Americans, right? I mean, not that many people. I mean, everybody's kind of different. So.
And they're haters of every single possible breed and background. But I will say this. I mean, I think one thing people forget, even about the Tiger Mom experience, so to speak, which sounds like it should be some sort of concert, right? The Tiger Mom experience. It is that as much as there were a lot of people who hated on the book, who disagreed with it, you know, obviously we've had our disagreements and our agreements. We've had our own conversations about the various things. There were more people who were in column inches, who were talking back, who were being given platforms to discuss their backgrounds, their traumas, their hopes, their dreams, their delusions and illusions, and their aspirations after that book came out than ever before in the Asian American community. And that has also happened here, right? Yeah. So maybe these things do at least unleash a little bit of that.
Well, I think going back to your question specifically, I think like, you know, we have to understand that this show is about Asian Americans, but it's not made by Asian Americans. There are people. There's a process at which you have to go through, and the people that are casting, you know, they just see an Asian face. They don't give a shit like who, if you're Korean or Chinese. Randall Park was just Kim Jong-un, you know. Yeah. So, you know, it's in terms of like you have to think about the first computer that was invented. It was like this huge thing. It was you know, there was a lot of problems, but it's an evolving process, you know. Hopefully in a couple of years we'll have a MacBook Pro where everyone is really Korean, is really Chinese, and they have real accents, and it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an important question. I'm glad you asked that. And there are a lot of murky areas that are covered. I mean, a lot of people commented on in the first episode the confrontation between young Eddie and the black kid at the school. And I mean, personally, I had already read a lot about that scene before I watched the episode and had context for what happened to Eddie in real life, how it fits into the story arc with those two characters later on. So it didn't have a big impact on me, but I definitely understand why other people reacted to it and were uncomfortable with it. And I think that sort of thing, the very complex, fraught relationship between different people of color in America, is very difficult for us to discuss even amongst ourselves, much less on a sitcom made for the wider world. And, you know, what is proper representation on a whole bunch of different levels is murky and fraught, but I think the way you figure that out is by taking those clumsy first steps and getting to do it. And I think a big advantage we have now is that all media is so much more two-way. And with this show, we even have Eddie Wong himself modeling, pushing back against the show. So I think I think it's possible to have much more rapid progress in terms of figuring these things out, especially if it helps us expand and have a bunch of different people trying to.
If the whole world don't burn first, but I mean, I will say one minor point of redirect on the casting part, because this is actually a very unique moment in the history of ABC in particular, right? And this is something that this is a story that hasn't really been told. The reason why this show actually happened is because the wheels turned, all the tumblers in the lock happened to click at a single moment where everybody, up until, but not including, the head of the network, who was in the decision-making capability at ABC, is Asian American, right? And, I mean, the head of the network is Paul Lee. He's not Asian. He could have been, but he sounds like it. But immediately beneath him, if you will, reporting to him, head of comedy is Sami Kim Falvey, right, who's Korean American. The head of casting at ABC is Kelly Lee, Korean American woman also. The head of sales for ABC, and that's actually really critical because you don't sell ads, you don't do anything. The head of sales for ABC across, I think, ABC networks, including Family, et cetera, Jerry Wang, another Asian American woman. Then you had Melvin Marr, who was the executive producer who bought Eddie Huang's script, and they were brought together by Quan Fung, another former exec at Fox, former exec at NBC, who said, hey, you know, this thing, check this out. I mean, there's like a lot of different ways in which this thing could have been stabbed in the cradle, and it didn't because it happened to actually have Asian Americans behind the scenes who shepherded this through. So yes, the casting isn't perfect, but more because I think Hollywood's lens is sort of like, Hugh Jackman can have an American accent, can't he? You know what I mean? They don't care about that stuff. They are saying we want funny people out there. Someday we'll have enough people, I think, out there to be able to cast specifically for those roles. Until then, let's see. Randall is awesome, I will say that. Sorry, we have another question.
I'm Kathleen. My question actually comes back to your point about the huge confrontation on the first episode. As a Chinese American, I think that was such a strong moment of the show. Like, it's happened to me, and I keep going back and forth between that moment because using the word chink, it's, you know, to me, I've been called that, and it's the equivalent to, you know, the N-word. So what are your thoughts about that not being a censored FCC word? Like, I felt like it was important to hear it for the moment, but at the same time, I got a little angry.
Yeah, but you just said the N-word and you said chink,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. Well, the C word can be so many different things, I guess,
that's
too.
True.
So
the CH, the CH word.
And that's like that's part of the point. If they bleeped it, it could have been anything, you know?
Yeah. Well, wasn't the N-word like able to be on the radio until recently? Isn't that not?
Standards and practices.
I mean, it was on the Chappelle Show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not network.
Is that?
No.
Okay. Right.
I mean, I think I would think that it's because I'm going to toss this out. I think there are two things here. One is that I genuinely don't think that people think that the word chink is as bad as the N-word. And I think that is in part because the corrosive and toxic and almost indescribably racist history of white America and America at large, not just whites, right? You know, attitude towards black America persisting to this day is such that that word is freighted with so much more than virtually any other word in America, and maybe even in the virtually in the world that you can actually use. There's that. So it's the power of that. But the second thing is this: we live in a world where that word is tossed around because it has other meanings. If you recall, during another very feverish moment for Asian America recently, what was it, Lin something? There was a huge outcry over the fact that ESPN used this term, chink in the armor. And their claim was, oh, we're literally using it as the term means. It's this sort of vulnerable place that you have, this chink in the armor, right? So there is that excuse they can use. You cannot use that excuse, the N-word, right?
Am I supposed to have the answer for that?
It makes sense as an Asian American that when that word is said to us, it's the same. It carries the same insulting, terrible meaning that comes with when someone uses the N-word at a black person. It's a terrible word to hear. It's traumatizing for us. But the truth is that you're right. Like our society is not built to be PC enough to censor that word on broadcast television. It's just not there yet. Maybe this show will help it get there.
I actually feel in some ways like if it had been censored, a lot of people wouldn't quite know what was going on in that scene.
Yeah, I think it's important to, with any of these words, and I agree, the N-word has a unique place in American history without getting into a competitive better or worse.
Pickle chink is worse.
I think we should have the leeway with each of these words. I think sometimes it's necessary. I mean, if you take the N-word out of Huckleberry Finn, or Blazing Saddles for that matter, you're missing the point of the whole exercise. I mean, I think it was, if I may presume to say so, I think it was important to have the word actually be heard in that scene.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, that's like one of the most important things to Eddie, that word was used
Right.
on TV. It galvanizes you to hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think people even know that there's, honestly, I've been called chink in groups of that size, of kids. And they did not go, oh, the way that they did on this show. They were like, they just walked on. So even seeing that there's a reaction to the word is kind of a big thing, I think. Are there any other people who want to come up, and ask questions? I mean, we have other stuff to talk about too, but we would love to. We want you guys to talk. It is a big part of this, and we'll keep on talking while you guys decide whether you want to join us. So one of the things about I think that was interesting about the second episode tonight, which was I think the most over-the-top sitcom-y episode in the 4 so far, obviously. But the one thing that I thought was really interesting was that it was, first of all, the first episode where there literally were nothing but Asian people on screen. I mean, there was, a couple people, O.J. Simpson and his doppelganger. But everybody else it was an intramural episode. And the thing that they were talking about was this kind of unique element of preserving face, of preserving your sense of place based on what other people, including your own family, thought about you. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on this. Actually, Amy, I'm going to call this out to you in particular.
Yeah, I might relate to it more because I think, remember, this show is situated in, a lot of these guys are younger, so it's, what is it? Is it 70s?
90s.
90s, but still, it's like he was born in. Those grandparents are of a different generation. Those grandparents and that whole sibling rivalry thing didn't remind me of the way I am with my own sisters. But it completely captured my father's relationships with his. So that's what I mean. It's I don't know if everybody's going to get that, but like. This saving face thing, like my father was the middle of 8 kids and was exactly like that. There was a favorite, and I think it's, again, very authentic to that generation where they're openly comparing each other, just completely against anything that a parent should do according to, so that was interesting, that saving the face thing. The idea of family honor and showing off has come down to today in a different form that I'm very aware of. Back on the parenting thing, a lot of Asian kids, when they're unhappy about the way they're being raised, they're like, my parents don't even love me. All they care about is showing off to their friends, right? Like, who's gonna, my kid's gonna get to this school, this. So that strand of it, I think, is still exists, but that whole just the sibling thing, I thought, I don't know, maybe the
both
younger
your daughters are
generation.
at Harvard, right? Is that?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's something which every I think Asian American kid remembers, that their parents can't praise them, except in this weird setting where you actually are praising your kids by praising other people's kids in some ways, like a sort of reverse thing. It's like, oh, my kids suck. They're terrible. They're only, he's only going to Yale, or he's only whatever, stuff like that. But that representation by Asian parents, first generation Asian parents, obviously does ring kind of true on some level. But okay, we have another question.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. It's really amazing. I have like 2 questions, but I feel like you kind of answered the first question I had. Which was about, I love Fresh Off the Boat. And I feel like I've had conversations with friends about sort of like the abuse aspect in Eddie Wong's memoirs. And I feel like a lot of people have sort of talked about that. Fresh Off the Boat, we can't sort of have that aspect in network television, and whether you guys think that should be included or whether it shouldn't be, because basically the show is loosely based off of the memoir, and are we able to now see like something that talks about abuse to be like on a show that comes after Modern Family, and a half-an-hour sitcom? And then my second question is also more about like, I feel like ABC has a lot of diverse shows, sitcoms that are playing out this sort of TV experience, and whether or not all the shows are going to survive. We have like sort of Blackish, Christella, and then now Fresh Off the Boat, and whether or not there's going to be at the end of the sweep season to see the second season, is there going to be sort of like a die-hard which one is going to win?
It's going to be the Hunger Games.
That's kind of how I feel. So yeah, those are my
The
questions.
abuse aspect is something that I don't think America would ever be able to understand if put on a lighthearted family comedy that came after Modern Family. But it is something that when I'm in a circle of Asian girls, that is the one thing that we have in common growing up. A lot of Asian children are hit when they're young, and it's a formative process. It makes us who we are, and it almost to the point where there's a humorous aspect of it when we're talking about it. But do I think that tax evasion, should be a mahjong? My grandma took me to a mahjong game in New Jersey one time, like in the middle of the night at a laundromat. Should that be on TV? No, because they tell you in America if your parents hit you, you call the police. And then when you do that, your Asian family is like, I can't believe you did that. We were supposed to be doing this. So yeah, I think that's a really good question.
I mean, obviously, themes of abuse and what constitutes abuse were things that came up in the wake of Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother as well, right?
Yeah, but that really, really upset me, because we didn't do any of this. So that was, but what I was going to say, I think it goes back to an earlier point about, I've just been watching Empire, and there is a lot. There is abuse there, or I don't know how we're using these terms, but it's, but so this just hit me. I don't know the answer. Nothing smart to say about that. But maybe because there is also Blackish. Maybe because there are other shows. This is the first one, and it's a comedy. It's on
Exactly.
But yeah, it's a really interesting question. Again, maybe it's just one like. If there's more and more and more on a different,
then finally we'll get to show abuse.
Yeah, or just different aspects. Some of the dark,
I think the show as it is now, it'd be very difficult to incorporate abuse and really do it properly and respectfully. But I think a show can develop over time. You could even look at a show like Adventure Time, if anyone watches that. It started off as this whimsical,
It's gotten
absurdist
really dark.
cartoon, but it's developed this tonal, emotional breadth and depth where they're dealing not with abuse, but with this neglectful father of the main character in a way that's really powerful to me. So I think it's possible for a show that starts off as a comedy to reach a place where it can do that.
Yeah, like what about the neglectful Asian dad? You know, the guy who like never talks and is just eating Danish cookies in his study the whole time and like has never talked to you your whole life, you know?
Well, actually, I mean, I would say, you know, one of the interesting things here is I think that it is self-consciously trying to, on the one hand, represent some authentic things, but on the other hand, represent some aspirational things, like Asian parents actually holding hands and stuff like that. And in the episode, the Home Sweet Homeschool one, like there's this amazing moment where Randall Park's character, Lewis, sits down with Eddie, you know, Hudson's character, Eddie, and just does that whole sort of, you know, courtship of Eddie's father thing, you know, talks him through, you know, all those things, and then plays basketball with him. I'm like, what? You know, that's like fantasy land. But seeing it on screen, I cannot help but feel like I was tearing up a little bit. And
it could be generational.
I mean, it's totally
because
generational.
I talk to these even new immigrants now, right? Who it's, I think, aspirational, but also maybe even sort of happening.
Yeah. I mean, things do change, right? Yeah. But back in the 90s, no way. I mean, but that said, just on the, I mean, I don't think even Eddie knows this, but there actually is an episode that doesn't quite address abuse per se, but the perception of abuse that comes up later in the season. And it's cast, again, in kind of modern family sitcom terms. But let's just say, like, there's a scene in the book where, you know, Child Protective Services come to the home, right? And that is another one of those sort of signal moments of the book, Fresh Off the Boat. And they do try to recapture that in the show, and they do it in a way which is safe for primetime TV, but it's still, I think, for America, there's going to be a thing there, you know? So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I think that, again, it's more about the conversation that comes out of it than anything else. Any more questions up here? All right, cool.
Hi, how are you? Hi. This is my first time even hearing about Fresh Off the Boat. I came to an event on Friday, and I was excited to come see this. I am a filmmaker. My name is Bridget Turner. And I wanted to know, from when it was first written in pilot form, maybe, did you find that from the network picking it up and all of that, has it changed from the original aspect of what you wanted it to be?
I have zero power in the process. I mean, I barely have power over my own son. But I will say this. I actually, because of my non-father of the actor role, you know, I actually got to see leaked scenes from the script, leaked pages from the script early on. People were like, did you know this is happening? Eddie's book has actually been picked up for primetime TV, for a pilot anyway. And I was like, there's no way this is going to be put on television as a comedy. But then I read the early scenes, and a lot of it is actually on that screen, you know? I think what hit me then was the degree to which they were really skating this very fine line between something which, you know, because one of the scenes I did read was, in fact, the Walter and Eddie scene, that chink scene, between what I thought was at the edge of what broadcast TV, network TV was going to be willing to even put on screen, and stuff which I thought was actually really funny and entertaining in a more anodyne fashion. And I think that for the pilot especially was very well preserved. I think that what is, you know, much harder once you're picked up for series is figuring out how to turn, you know, for the pilot they crammed a ton of stuff into that one episode. Now they got to make it work not just for 13 episodes, but hopefully for 6 seasons in a movie. There's a lot more that they've got to actually make work. And what I'd say is, I'm with Jay on this. I think that we have to see it play out. I think that the network did push back on a lot of stuff that Eddie obviously wanted, even the producers wanted. They pushed back hard enough so a lot of it's on screen, but you'll still see, you know, a fair amount of stuff which is crowd pleasing, you know, and then you also see stuff which is crowd disturbing, and it's that balance which I want to see, you know, going forward.
So would you say that the book is like more refreshing to read than watching it on screen?
I wouldn't say the book is refreshing per se. I mean, the book was the book was like a punch in the face in so many ways, a very pleasurable punch in the face. But I had never read anything like that from an Asian American pen before. I've never seen anything like this from a network mainstream broadcast screen before. So they're both refreshing, if you want to call it that way, but from very different contexts and mediums, right? I gotta say, it's refreshing for me to see my son's bad behavior actually being laughed at and celebrated instead of like, me going, oh God. But I'm just kidding. Anyway, but thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's time for another question.
Oh, yeah, I think so. We got a couple more, right?
Great. Well, thanks for having this talk. My name is Alex Ho, and I wanted to ask about if you guys had thoughts about the accents. I know that that's been a huge part of the discussion, and I really love thinking about it. And on one hand, I kind of really love the presence of Asian accents on TV, because I kind of think that we don't really know what is an authentic Chinese or Taiwanese or Cantonese accent sometimes, or regionally, because there's so much variety. And it's kind of cool in a way to have the parents be able to have a little more English fluency than they would in real life, because they can have zippier one-liners. But I just want to know if you guys had any more thoughts about them. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you.
You summed it up so well, actually. Of course, there are moments as a Chinese speaker. There are moments where that's not the right accent. I think they actually do a really good job, right? Because first they're at least willing. I was afraid, what are we going to avoid stereotypes? They're going to have no accents, which of course is then not real at all, because they're all. But in order to be funny, right, you can't have somebody who actually can't speak. I mean, I feel for the ABC network. The fact that they have the grandmothers who are actually speaking Chinese, real, because I can understand that helps a lot, right? Because that's totally real. But I thought your own analysis was very good. I mean, definitely it goes back to the there's so many kinds of Asians, and also, a Taiwanese accent that happens to actually be my own dialect. That is impossible. You can't find. You're not going to be able to find somebody who's going to be able to do this. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I'll say two things. One is that I think if you kind of look carefully, by like episode 3, they're not even trying very hard anymore. Right. It's like those accents are gone, especially Constance, because she did her best. But I'm sorry. That was just really, really, it was distracting. And she's such a good actress that to have that be the thing people heard, why you not drink beer? No, that's not really, there's so much more nuance in her performance now that has kind of melted away. But that was the pilot. That was what they actually kind of thought was the right thing to do, because his parents really do have accents, right? So there's that. But I actually think what you said about the grandmothers is really important, because I did, in fact, actually tweet this just musingly early on, which is that this is going to be the first show on network TV in which there is literally Mandarin in virtually every episode, like spoken Mandarin with subtitles. And I mean, I don't know where you have to go, like Kung Fu or something. It's like the last show I can think of where that was kind of the common, a lingua franca or something of the episodes in addition to English. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those weird things. I think actually it extends beyond that, because there's so much, talk about code switching, right? There's so much like conversation around, whether or not if you, for instance, speak without an accent entirely, whether you're covering, whether you're, trying to kind of deracinate yourself or hide from, the reality of your immigrant background. Or, you mentioned your dad being like kind of the Guido from Queens. If you have an accent and you're Asian and it's not an Asian accent, what does that mean for you, right? So, yeah, it's more nuanced.
I think I was a little curious as to whether, maybe there was a point where someone thought there should have been a conversation about to improve their accent, but maybe they felt offended to, ask them, can you improve your Asian accent? because that was the only thing that was the only, maybe the person was like, I don't know if I should, maybe he don't like that, But then, because, Randall Park sounds like, the guy from The Hangover that gets out of the trunk. When you close your eyes and listen to the accent, it's literally like, you know what I mean? Like that dude who gets out of the trunk naked. I mean, that's comical. I mean, whatever. Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, again, accents are just one more of those things that we have always and will always have to deal with on some level as Asian Americans in the media context. I think, you know, they did their best. I'm pretty much glad that they've let that kind of melt into the background a little bit more, by and large. Sorry, we have a couple more questions.
Hi, my name's Michelle. In the beginning, Ms. Chua said something about being really scared about the series before actually seeing it. And I felt exactly the same way. I grew up in the Midwest. I was like one of 2 Asians who weren't related to me in my high school. And so I was like really scared that it was just going to be like 25 minutes of really bad Asian stereotypes. But my question to you is, what do you think the benefits and drawbacks are of seeing Asian Americans in the mainstream in such a not stereotypical, but this is a very unique Chinese experience, versus other channels, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube channel Wong Fu.
Oh yeah, of course.
Where they show Asians in roles that have subtle nods to Asian heritage, but they don't necessarily need to be played by Asians.
I mean, just to that point, and mad respect for Wong Fu. They actually interviewed the cast of Fresh Off the Boat at TCA, and it's up now. You should check it out. It is hilarious. Again, Hudson, bad attitude, but in the funniest possible ways. Like, you know, what are you guys, like 40 years old? It was very funny. How many subscribers do you have again? I think there needs to be obviously more than, again, one show. There needs to be the shows where Asian Americans have no accents and hang out and are those guys in Friends, right? Because in Friends, they're all white. Nobody notices they're all white, except for those of us who are not white. And they can hang out and just live in this bubble of, you know, ordinariness because they are the norm in a New York City where the majority of New York is like not white. It's still normative. I think that this is a show which is trying to do something specific. We can't really gauge whether or not it's better or worse for it to be a certain way, except for the fact that this is a multi-generational show. And I do think that what you'll see, especially with Eddie's role and the other 2 kids, their story plays out in a very different space. And, you know, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I think there is stuff that's happening there that, you know, while it's not the same as what you would see on a Wong Fu production, you know, like a romantic comedy with Asian Americans where race is almost secondary, right? There's enough of that there that it's not hammering you in the face with Asianness all the time, if you will.
I think it's really an ambitious, you know, I mean, at one level, it's just this zany sitcom, whatever, and I don't know, but it's actually very ambitious in a certain way. And just going back to this Tiger Mom thing, it's very tricky what they're trying to do, because so there's some aspects, I mean, so you get criticized from all sides. There's some aspects that are very stereotypical about the Tiger Mom, whatever, also true to life, but then there's some parts that might be criticized as being too Western and authentic, when she, like the scene today where she goes for the friend, she defends the friend. And I think in the ideal, what I see, you know, taking a generous view, is I think it's great that they're walking this fine line. They want a glimpse of reality, because a lot of Chinese parents are like that, but then they want to humanize her to sort of make it, look, it's universal. She actually loves her kids. There's like, she's you know, so I think, and that reminds me of the thing the people who got this Tiger Mom book, who read it to the end and realized my younger daughter rebelled and my sister got cancer and it was really not what everybody, whatever. It was in a way the same goal, which is like, you could read it as like, oh my God, it's a Tiger Mom stereotype, whatever. But I think I saw it more like, if you understand the book, it's like we're all in the same struggle, right? Like we all have problems with our friends. We all want to fit in. We all feel excluded sometimes. We all want our kids to do well and be happy. And so I think it's this fine line between they're trying to actually give a glimpse of authenticity, but it's kind of what you were saying, like, America's not ready for it all, right? So you then like balance it off with like, aw, you hear like, aw, you know, so then she's okay again. And I mean, that's kind of the way I'm reading it.
And we also shouldn't forget about that, like, you know, Asian American actresses have been on television like for a while, you know, like Sun from Lost, Sandra Oh on Arliss and Grey's Anatomy. You know, there are Asian characters that exist, and you're not even the person that asked the question, and I'm like yelling at you. There are Asian American people. There are Asian American people that have been on television for a long time. This is not the end all be all. This is not the beginning. There are smart, interesting, evolving characters that were on television, and they're not associated with Fresh Off the Boat. So yeah.
Up until I would say Sandra Oh on Grey's Anatomy, they never played major characters.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the issue. That's the issue. I just don't. Yeah.
I would say though, I mean, okay, so the counter to that really is the Mindy Project, right? So Mindy Kaling, she created the show. She is the showrunner. She is the main character, and she's been criticized because her character refuses to engage ethnicities. She says that's not the story she's trying to tell. It's like, why doesn't your character date Asian men? Why doesn't your character engage with issues of race? How is it that she's all of a sudden depicted as, you know, just a normal person in a world where no one comments on her identity? I mean, you can't win, right? But thank you for that question. This will, I guess, be the last question, I imagine.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and question, I went to art school. I was very lucky, but every conversation while I was in college with my parents ended with, have you thought about transferring to business school? And even when I went to go see my friends' plays from like their acting school, there were virtually no Asian actors in the program. And touching on the first question that was asked earlier today, do you think the culture of like Asian American upbringing and how they raise their children discourage this problem? And are they bitches for like complaining about it when that's how they were raised?
Well, we're not supposed to, you know, sleep over. We only do violin, only classical music. Theater's discouraged, as I understand. No, I mean, well, Amy, that's actually
I think
pre-built
there's
for
a
you,
huge, I do, just because I teach, you know, whatever, 25 to 30-year-olds, I think there's a massive change in the Asian American population. I will say that this is actually not just about Asians. It's a typical immigrant pattern. The first, you know, you're starting with the Jews, just any immigrant group, the ones that come over with no money, their chief concerns are survival for the family. And people who come over, they could be Polish immigrants, Irish, they are not going to be, most immigrants who are poor cannot be civic and worried about the homeless people, you know, because they are worried about survival. They tend to want their kids to be things that are secure. You know, and I suffered from this. I had the whole stereotypical, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, I couldn't do it, you know. But it's not that they're evil people. It's an immigrant pattern that they want security, and they're afraid that if you have them be a jazz musician, they're not going to be able to survive. And that changes per generation. This is what our new book's about. The next generation is a little more secure, more assimilated, and that generation, if you look at their career choices, it is totally different from what the parents wanted, and that's where you also see the fight, the conflict, because sometimes the oppressive parent is like, you have to do this. But I think you're going to see a massive change. You're going to see a massive change in the next 20 years. Even in the corporate world, startup, I mean, that's maybe just me being optimistic, but I think it's going to be really big.
It's happening.
Dude, I'm a rapper. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? My grandma was like not down, and then I was like, she's like, wow, you make money. Wow. So now she's like calling me every day. She's like, you gotta make another My Veg. That one was the best. She's like, that one was the best one. Yeah, but I feel like, you know, I was just listening to a podcast about this cam girl, you know, I don't know if you need to go there right now, but anyway, she's a cam girl, and her parents are like, you know, we're glad you're doing this, you know, like you're making money, you know, you're liberated sexually, and you know, so it's just like, you know, I think the thoughts are evolving, and I think like Amy said, we're gonna have tons of Asian American entertainers. We're gonna see more rappers, we're gonna see more actors, we're gonna see more reporters, you know. They're really getting it in right now. Listen,
And that's when it works well. That's such a funny story, right? Because at first I mean, it doesn't always work well. There are plenty of stories where the parents just don't get it. But when it works well, it's like the scene I was talking about, where you get this mix where at first they're disapproving. Like, so before Tiger Mom came out, my mom was like, why are you, why is it so personal or whatever, not approving. But when it came out and there was a firestorm, the family closed like a wall. I mean, they were like so supportive in every way. Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting, you know. So that generation changes too. You can change minds. Young people can change the older people, right?
And hopefully we'll change a lot of them right here with this. And thank you guys so much for coming out and for sticking with us. Thank you to WNYC and the Greene Space, Jennifer Sendrau, all of you guys who helped put this together. Watch the show, all right? Watch it again tomorrow. DVR, then watch it again. Thank you guys.